He heard faint cries under a fallen tree and rescued 2 wolf cubs. But when he realized what people had done to their mother, it became clear that the forest would never be the same again. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. The forest had always been a vast, breathing world of shadows and whispering winds. But on that particular evening, its presence felt deeper, older, as if something ancient beneath the layers of moss and roots had stirred from a long slumber. The sky above the northern woods grew heavy with clouds that rolled slowly across the horizon, gathering weight as they swallowed the last traces of daylight. What little light remained filtered through the branches in thin, uncertain strands, painting the trunks of the tall evergreens in uneven patches of silver and gray. Somewhere far away, a crow cried once, sharply, as if warning the forest of what was coming. In the hidden valleys, where the thickest trees intertwined their roots like the bones of old giants, a small community of beings moved quietly through the undergrowth. Their massive silhouettes blended with the dark trunks, and their footsteps sank soundlessly into the soft layers of needles and moss. Bigfoot had lived in these woods for generations beyond counting, unseen by humans, unnoticed by the world that roared beyond the tree line. They had long ago chosen silence over conflict, shadows over exposure. It was said among them that as long as they walked quietly and listened carefully, the forest would shelter them from every danger. The young one, however, had always struggled with silence. He was smaller than the others, his fur lighter, his movements quicker and more curious. While others spent hours standing motionless, listening to the low hum of the earth beneath their feet, he wandered. He listened, too, just not in the way the elders approved of. He loved the trembling song of the river where it met cold stones, the soft sighs of branches bending after snowfall, the distant howls of wolves echoing like stories in the night. His heart was wide open to every sound the forest made, and sometimes he felt the entire world shifting inside him, like a tide pulling him somewhere he could not yet reach. The elders often watched him with quiet apprehension. They said he lacked discipline, that he wandered too close to the boundaries where the scent of humans lingered. But they also sensed something else. An echo in him, a faint but unmistakable trace of a gift the forest had not shown their kind for generations. He seemed to feel its moods before they changed, to sense its warnings before its winds carried them. The elders did not say this aloud. The old laws were strict, and their survival depended on obeying them. Curiosity led to danger, and danger led to exposure. They would not allow such risks, not even from a child whose heart beat like a small ember glowing in the shadows. That evening, long before the storm arrived, he felt a strange vibration shiver through the soil. It rose into his feet like a distant footstep, but heavier, deeper, and it pulsed again and again like a call. The others felt only the approaching storm, the humidity in the air, the heaviness of the wind, the faint metallic taste that accompanied lightning. But the young one felt something else entirely, something that tugged at the edge of his attention like a desperate whisper. He stood apart from the others as the sky darkened, glancing toward the northern slope where the vibration came from. Something small, faint, and frightened was trembling there, sending out desperate signals that only he seemed to hear. The first crack of thunder split the sky, and rain began to fall in sparse, cold drops. The elders motioned for the young ones to retreat deeper into the shelter of their hidden hollows, but the child lingered. He watched the silhouettes of the older Bigfoot disappear into the darkness, yet he remained still, listening. The vibration came again, but this time it carried a sharp note. A brief, high-pitched cry that was swallowed almost immediately by the thunder. But he heard it clearly, a sound of fear, a sound of pain. He stepped backward as if torn, glancing toward the safety of his kind, then toward the darkness between the trees. The elders had always said that the forest could handle its own matters, that their kind must never interfere in the natural cycles. But this was not simply the voice of the forest shifting. This was the voice of something small, a living creature trapped in misery. He waited for the elders to return and issue a command. None came. The storm intensified, and he felt the vibration growing weaker, like the heartbeat of something fading. He made his choice. The rain thickened as he ran beneath the towering pines, droplets striking his fur and soaking into his skin as he leapt over roots and ducked beneath fallen branches. Lightning flashed, illuminating the narrow path ahead in blinding white. Each flash revealed more of the forest, shimmering wet, trembling with the power of the storm. The thunder echoed close behind, shaking the ground with a force that made even the tallest trees quiver. He felt fear rise in him. Fear of the storm, fear of breaking the law, but the cry he'd heard was stronger than both. The northern slope descended sharply into a small hollow, and as he slid down the mud-slicked incline, he smelled something sharp and metallic. Blood. An animal's blood. The scent grew stronger as he pushed through a cluster of wet branches that slapped against his shoulders. His eyes widened when he saw the fallen tree. A great pine lay shattered across the clearing, its trunk split by lightning. Beneath one of the heavy branches lay two tiny shapes, barely moving. They whimpered softly, paws scraping weakly against the earth as they struggled to breathe. They were small, very small, still at the age when they should have been pressed against their mother's warm belly. The branch had pinned them down, trapping them in cold mud that sucked at their thin fur. A few feet away, the forest cast another shadow. He turned and met the eyes of their mother. The wolf was unlike any he had seen before. Her coat shimmered silver under the rain, and her yellow eyes glowed with pain and determination. Her front leg was caught in a jagged metal trap that clung to her like a bite from something made of stone. She could not reach her pups, could not move toward them no matter how she pulled, no matter how she whimpered through clenched jaws. She watched as the child stepped closer, her breath coming in hard bursts, steam rising from her body as rain struck the heat of her skin. He froze, sensing both her fear and her desperation. Wolves could be dangerous, especially when wounded and defending young. But something in the way she held her gaze told him she understood. She knew she could not help them, and in that moment, she trusted him. He approached the fallen branch carefully. It was thick and heavy, far beyond what his small arms were meant to lift. But he pressed his hands against its soaked bark, pushed with all his strength, and felt his feet slip in the mud. He grunted, breath straining, and thunder struck again overhead. He tried a second time, bracing his back, pushing upward with everything he had. The pine did not move. He paused, panting, staring at the tiny forms beneath the branch. Their whimpers were growing weaker, their eyes barely open. He felt a strange warmth rise beneath his feet, a vibration that traveled up his legs, through his ribs, and into his arms. It was as if the earth itself pushed with him, as if the forest whispered, just for an instant, a wordless encouragement. He heaved once more. The branch shifted. Just a few inches, but enough. The pups wriggled free, tumbling toward him with soft cries. He gathered them into his arms quickly, shielding them from the rain with his body. They were cold, trembling violently, their breaths small and uneven. He knew they would not survive the storm without warmth, without shelter. And he knew only one place where warmth existed even in the middle of winter. He carried them through the rain, feeling their tiny hearts flutter against his chest. He glanced back once. The silver wolf watched him, her eyes shining with something he could not name. Gratitude. Recognition. A flicker of something ancient between their kinds that had long been buried beneath generations of fear. He led them toward the hidden springs, a place Bigfoot rarely shared even among themselves. Steam rose from the ground where the hot water pooled, surrounded by thick moss and low stone walls that protected the place from the cold. He lowered the pups gently onto the warm stone and guided them closer to the water's edge until the heat seeped into their bodies. Their shivers grew weaker, their breaths steadier. He stayed beside them for a long time, letting his own body heat help revive them, watching the storm ease slightly, as if the forest itself took a gentler breath. But dawn brought consequences. The elders found him seated beside the pups, his fur still wet from the storm, his eyes tired but protective. Their faces hardened with shock, disappointment, and even fear. They did not raise their voices. They communicated with presence, with posture, with a deep rumbling in their chests that conveyed worry masked as anger. What he had done was forbidden. Wolves were dangerous, injured wolves even more so. And the human-made trap attached to the wolf mother's leg meant humans were too close. The laws existed for a reason. He did not fight them when they stepped closer, but the pups whimpered and tried to hide beneath him. The elders reached for them, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then a sound split the air. It was a low, trembling growl, not from the elders, but from the silver wolf. She limped forward, her wounded leg dragging behind her, her body weakened, but fierce. She positioned herself between the elders and her young, her fur raised despite the pain that must have seared through her leg. Her golden eyes locked with theirs, not attacking, not challenging, simply refusing to allow harm. The elders froze. Never in all their years had a wolf defended a member of their kind. Never had a wounded animal stood between them and danger. Something deeper than instinct was at play, something ancient, a memory the forest itself had nearly forgotten. Before anyone could react, a new scent drifted into the clearing. Metal. Fuel. Humans. The elders turned their heads sharply toward the north, where the wind carried the unmistakable smell of machinery and campfires. It was wrong, out of place, deeper in the forest than humans ever ventured. The silver wolf whimpered softly, leaning on her good leg. Her pups trembled beside the young Bigfoot, pressing their tiny bodies into his fur. Something was coming. Something dangerous. The elders exchanged silent, urgent glances, then looked at the young one again, at the pups beside him, at the wolf who defended him. The storm had brought more than wind and lightning. It had carried change. They gave him one last look before retreating into the shadows, but he understood what that look meant. He had broken the law, and the forest had noticed. The forest remained tense long after the elders vanished, its silence deeper than before. Clouds drifted slowly across the morning sky, as if uncertain whether to leave or gather again. The young one remained beside the pups until the silver wolf lifted her weary body and attempted to limp away. She paused only once, looking back at him with a gaze that held gratitude, sorrow, and warning. That night, the pups returned to him alone. They whined softly, circling him with anxious movements, noses pressed to the ground. They nudged him toward the direction where their mother had gone. He followed their path until he saw the crushed moss, the droplets of blood, and the broken branches. Then he saw the footprints, not hers, human ones. Heavy boots sinking into the soil, leaving deep impressions that pointed toward the far side of the forest, where the ground sloped and grew colder. He knew the humans had taken her, and he knew what he had to do. He stood still for a long moment, listening to the forest around him. The old laws whispered in his mind: never interfere, never approach humans, never leave the safety of the clan. The elder's disappointment still clung to his fur like the cold rain, but the pups pressed their tiny bodies against his leg, their trembling growing stronger. He could leave them. He could return to the elders and pretend none of this happened. But if he did, the pups would die without their mother. And even if they survived, the silver wolf would not. The humans would not release her. He had seen the trap on her leg. They were hunters, trappers, takers. They would not show mercy. Something deep inside him, something older than fear, rose like a spark catching fire. He took the pups into his arms. Without looking back toward his clan, he stepped into the darkness between the trees, moving silently beneath the moonlight. By the time dawn broke again, the young Bigfoot and the wolf pups were far from home, disappearing into the places where the scent of humans grew sharper and the forest grew strange. The first faint light of dawn did little to warm the forest. It spread across the treetops in thin, pale layers, barely touching the ground, where shadows still clung like stubborn remnants of night. The young Bigfoot moved through this shifting half-light, with the wolf pups pressed against his chest, their bodies trembling in short fits of fear and cold. He felt their small hearts beating rapidly, as if the forest itself pulsed inside them, urging them to move, to follow the scent of the one who had vanished into human hands. Every few steps, one of them lifted its nose to the air, sniffing sharply before nudging him to adjust course. Their instincts were strong, their fear stronger, and he let those trembling signals guide him deeper into the woods, where the trees grew tall and old enough to swallow entire secrets. The forest around them changed the farther they went. The familiar hum beneath his feet shifted into something brittle, disrupted. The birds that usually greeted the morning were silent. Even the wind felt different, its murmurs hollow and directionless. The soil underfoot lost its softness, replaced by patches of disturbed earth, where footprints, foreign and heavy, made dents in the moss. He crouched beside the first imprint he found, tracing its shape with gentle fingertips. Human scent clung to it, sharply pungent, oily, mixed with the metallic tinge of machinery. The pups whined softly. They recognized it too. He stood and continued forward, weaving between the trees as the ground sloped gradually downward. Fallen branches snapped underfoot, in places where humans had passed clumsily, uncaring for the noise they made or the plants they crushed. Leaves were scattered unnaturally, scraped aside by boots that dragged with weight. The air tasted like exhaust and cold metal, two sensations the young one had only ever smelled when humans strayed too close to the outer boundaries of the woods. But these traces were not on the edge. They led toward the heart of the forest, toward the places where his kind had always believed humans would never dare to tread. Every few minutes he stopped to place a hand against the earth, tracing its vibrations like a reader turning fragile pages. The signals from underground felt unsettled, shifting in unpredictable ways. Somewhere in the distance, he caught faint echoes. Short, irregular strikes of metal against metal, rhythmic and precise. Humans building something. Humans preparing. The forest tried to warn him through the subtle trembling in its roots, but he pushed onward, compelled by the memory of the silver wolf's eyes. Those eyes, bright with anguish, yet steady with a strange, ancient trust, lingered in his mind. She had believed in him, and her pups, small and helpless, believed in him now, too. He descended into a ravine, shrouded in mist. Here the trees grew closer together, their branches overlapping overhead like a woven canopus that filtered the light into thin ribbons of gray. The air was heavy with moisture and the faint scent of decay. In the center of the ravine lay a narrow stream, barely more than a trickle, but the pups hurried toward it, sniffing intensely at the stones. He watched them, realizing that the scent of their mother had lingered here, washed briefly by the water, but unmistakable. For the first time since dawn, a fragile thread of hope tightened inside him. She had passed through this place. She had been alive when she crossed the stream. He followed the pups to the opposite bank, where more footprints scarred the mud. Some were deep, as if the humans were carrying something heavy. Some prints showed dragging marks, a sign of a struggling animal being pulled unwillingly forward. The young Bigfoot felt a shudder move through his body. He imagined the silver wolf, injured and exhausted, forced to limp behind humans who cared nothing for her pain. His hands tightened involuntarily around the pups, as if shielding them from the image. They pressed closer to him, soft fur brushing against his chest. As the sun climbed higher, though still veiled by clouds, the forest started to reveal more signs of human activity. Bark had been stripped from trees, where ropes had rubbed against them. Branches were hacked away by blades that left harsh, angular cuts. A broken piece of metal, shaped like part of a cage door, lay discarded near a stump, smeared with rust and something darker. The young one lifted it closer to his face and flinched. Blood. Wolf blood! The pups whined at the smell and pressed against his legs. He let the metal fall back into the mud, feeling a rising swell of dread. But he pressed forward. Every step brought him closer to something he had never encountered directly before, an area filled with the unmistakable sound of human machinery. The noise reached him gradually at first, a faint, steady hum beneath the rustling of leaves, then grew stronger as he climbed the next ridge. It was a vibration that spread outward in ripples, disrupting the songs of the forest, the way a stone disrupts the surface of still water. He crouched low as he neared the ridge's crest, understanding instinctively that whatever lay beyond required caution. He reached the top and froze. Below him stretched a small clearing, unnaturally circular, as if the forest had been carved open with deliberate hands. Machines were scattered across the open space, metal cages, stacked in uneven piles, generators rumbling steadily, tents pitched beside flickering lanterns. The ground was muddy from the previous night's rain, churned by heavy boots and dragging chains. Several humans moved about the camp, their voices loud, their movements clumsy and confident. They carried metal tools, ropes, firearms. They were hunters not merely of prey, but of any creature they found profitable to trap or dangerous enough to boast about. His eyes searched the clearing urgently until he saw her. The silver wolf lay near a stack of cages, her body tense but weakened. Her injured leg had been bound by a rough leather strap attached to a long metal bar anchored against a heavy crate. She tried to stand when she heard a sudden shout from one of the humans, but fell back on her side, too exhausted to rise. The young one felt something inside him break quietly, a sharp pain that radiated from his chest outward. The pups whimpered as soon as they saw her, pawing desperately at him, as if trying to leap from his arms. He knew he could not rush down. The humans were too many, their weapons too dangerous. He waited, crouched low among the undergrowth, his body blending into the dark leaves. Hours passed as he watched the rhythm of the camp. The humans moved in predictable patterns. Some patrolled the edges with flashlights, others checked the traps placed around the perimeter, and some rested near the fire, laughing loudly about stories he could never understand. They feared nothing around them. They believed themselves alone. When night slowly crept across the clearing, the camp shifted. Lanterns flickered one by one, casting uneven circles of yellow light. The forest darkened until only the pale glow of moonlight traced the edges of the leaves. The humans' movement slowed. Some disappeared into tents, while others remained near the fire, their conversation sluggish. It was then that he placed the pups gently beneath a thick bush and prepared to move. He descended into the clearing like a shadow carried by the wind. Every step was careful, measured, timed to coincide with the gusts of breeze or the crackling of the fire, so that no sound he made would rise above the noise of the night. His breathing slowed, his heart steadied, his eyes adjusted to the dimness, finding every gap between the lanterns, every patch of darkness wide enough to conceal him. He moved along the outer edge of the clearing, circling around until he was close enough to reach the cages. When he finally approached the silver wolf, she lifted her head weakly. Her eyes met his, filled with a mixture of disbelief and relief so profound that he felt his chest tremble. She tried to rise again, as if to meet him halfway, but her strength failed. He reached for the leather strap and the cold bar that held her prisoner. The metal felt unforgiving beneath his fingers, biting into his palms with its rigid edges. He gripped it tightly, feeling the fury inside him channel into his arms. He pulled. The bar did not budge at first. The metal creaked softly but held strong. He tightened his stance, feeling the ground shift slightly beneath his feet. His breath deepened, and he heard the faint, distant voice of the forest moving through the leaves above him. He pulled again, harder, feeling the pressure burn into his muscles, feeling the strain travel up his bones. The metal let out a loud crack that echoed too sharply across the clearing, and he froze. One of the humans near the fire turned, lantern in hand, listening. The young Bigfoot pressed his body against the shadowed side of the crate, barely daring to breathe. The human scanned the area lazily, his footsteps unsteady from fatigue or drink. After a long moment, he turned back toward the fire. The night swallowed the sound of his boots. The young one waited until the clearing grew still again before he pulled once more. The metal finally gave way with a shuddering noise, breaking apart like a brittle bone. The silver wolf gasped softly, free at last. He knelt beside her, supporting her trembling body as she tried to stand. When she pressed her forehead weakly against his chest, the world around them dissolved for a heartbeat. He felt himself plunge into a flood of images he did not understand at first. Flashes of fire licking the tops of trees, the ground splitting beneath the weight of monstrous machines, the cries of animals echoing in panic as smoke drowned their breath. He saw wolves scattering in every direction, Bigfoot silhouettes fading into darkness, the forest shrinking under the relentless advance of metal and light. And then he saw something else, a small figure, a young one like himself, standing tall beside a wolf, their shapes united in defiance as the darkness closed in around them. The vision faded, leaving him breathless. The silver wolf sagged against him, drained by both her wound and the prophetic memory she had shared. He steadied her carefully, aware now of what that vision meant, not a warning merely for him, but for the forest. He had stepped into a path older than he knew. Footsteps sounded suddenly from the far end of the clearing. Multiple voices rose in confusion. Someone had noticed the broken bar. Someone had noticed the empty space where the wolf had lain. He turned swiftly and helped her limp toward the edge of the clearing, where the pups waited anxiously. They emerged with soft cries, brushing their noses against their mother's fur as quietly as they could. The young Bigfoot guided them into the shadows, just as the first humans reached the broken restraint, and shouted in alarm. Lanterns swung wildly. Flashlights pierced the darkness. Humans cursed, scattering in every direction. The clearing erupted into noise and panic, but by then, the young one and the wolves had already slipped into the forest's embrace. He did not know how far they could get before the humans regrouped, or how much danger still lay ahead. But he did know the forest had not abandoned them. The earth beneath his feet trembled faintly with a familiar rhythm, as if acknowledging his choice, as if waking after a long, deep sleep. He did not travel far before another presence stirred behind him. Heavy footsteps, far larger than human ones, approached with deliberate care. He turned to see several of the elders emerging from the shadows, their tall forms blending with the night. They had followed him, not to punish, but to understand what had driven him so far from tradition. Their eyes fell upon the wolf, the pups, the broken restraint. Their silence was deep, thoughtful. The eldest among them stepped closer, lowering his massive head toward the silver wolf. She did not growl this time. She met his gaze with weary acceptance. In that quiet exchange, something ancient rekindled itself, a bond the forest had once nurtured and later lost. The elders did not scold the young one. They did not speak at all. Instead, they positioned themselves around the clearing's perimeter. The ground shook subtly as they prepared for what came next. The forest answered. Through the shadows, wolves emerged one by one, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Birds rustled in the branches overhead. Even the wind seemed to gather strength, carrying with it the unmistakable tension of a world united in quiet purpose. Together, Bigfoot and wolves moved back toward the human camp, not with the intention to kill, for that was not their way, but to protect their home, to drive out the invaders who had broken the forest's laws. They were shadows among shadows, giants among ghosts, and the night itself bowed around them. The humans were unprepared. Their machines rattled before failing catastrophically, crushed by precisely thrown stones, or knocked aside by unseen hands. Generators faltered under the sudden vibration of the earth. Flashlights flickered and died. Wolves circled, their howls drawing men in the wrong direction, confusing them, scattering their sense of place. Panic overtook the camp, and soon the humans fled blindly through the trees, leaving everything behind. By the time the moon sank behind the clouds, the clearing was a graveyard of abandoned equipment. The forest grew still again, reclaiming the air around it, filling the silence with its slow, deliberate breath. The silver wolf lay beside her pups, exhausted, but alive. The young Bigfoot knelt near her, watching the elders observe the night sky through the branches. None spoke. They did not need words to acknowledge what had happened. The forest had chosen. He felt it as clearly as he felt the pups pressed against him. He sensed it in the way the elders' gaze softened when they looked at him, in the way the wolves lingered instead of fleeing, in the way the wind moved gently through the leaves as if whispering approval. He had broken the law, yes, but in doing so, he had awakened something long forgotten, a bond that had once held the forest together in times of danger. He helped the silver wolf stand, supporting her weight as she rose on her trembling legs. She touched her forehead to his chest once more, not with desperation this time, but with a quiet gratitude that resonated deep within him. Her pups circled their mother joyfully, and for a moment, the world felt whole. As dawn approached once more, washing the trees in a faint blue glow, the elders gathered around the young one. They stood silently, acknowledging the change that had come. The oldest of them stepped forward and looked at him for a long time, his eyes filled with something that resembled pride. He would no longer be the curious child who wandered too far. The forest had given him a purpose, and the forest was never wrong. When they finally returned to the shelter of the deeper woods, the wolves followed a while before branching off toward their own territory. Yet even as they disappeared among the shadows, the young one felt their presence lingering like a promise. He walked beside the elders, no longer behind them as a child, but not yet among them as an equal. Somewhere between, somewhere new, somewhere chosen. And in the soft tremble of the earth beneath his feet, he felt the forest whisper again, its voice warm, ancient, and certain. Everything had only just begun. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you want more right now, check out the other videos on the channel. There's plenty waiting for you. Share this video with someone who loves a good mystery, and I'll see you in the next story.